Mrs. Davison loved her little house. It was cozy, with a big garden full of colorful flowers. She spent most of her time tending to her roses and reading books on her porch. She liked the quiet life in her neighborhood, except for one thing, Karen. Karen lived across the street and was on the Homeowners Association, HOA, board. Karen loved rules. She made sure everyone followed them, even the silly ones, like having to have your trash cans perfectly lined up on trash day. Mrs. Davison always tried to be friendly, but Karen just seemed to look down on her. Karen thought Mrs. Davison was too quiet and kept to herself too much. Honestly, Karen would say to her friends, she probably doesn't even know what's going on in the neighborhood. Always in her garden, like some kind of flower elf. Mrs. Davison knew Karen talked about her, but she tried to ignore it. She believed in being kind and minding her own business. But Karen's latest stunt was about to push Mrs. Davison past her limit. One sunny afternoon, Mrs. Davison was watering her petunias when she saw a moving truck pull up next door to Karen's house. It was filled with tables, chairs, and a giant inflatable flamingo. Mrs. Davison knew exactly what that meant. Karen was throwing one of her famous parties. These parties were usually loud and went on late into the night. Mrs. Davison sighed. She knew she wouldn't get much sleep that night. Karen, seeing Mrs. Davison in her garden, strutted over with a wide, fake smile. "Oh, Mrs. Davison. Just wanted to let you know I'm having a little get-together tonight. Hope the music doesn't bother you too much." Mrs. Davison just nodded politely. She didn't want to start any trouble. Karen continued, "You know, I'm expecting a lot of guests, and I'm a little worried about them getting through the gate. It's such a hassle to explain the code to everyone." Karen paused, a mischievous glint in her eye. "Say, wouldn't it be funny if they all just used your code? It's so much easier." Mrs. Davison was taken aback. "But, that's my personal code," she stammered. Karen waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, don't be silly. It's just for one night. What's the big deal?" And before Mrs. Davison could protest, Karen had turned and sashayed back to her house, leaving Mrs. Davison fuming in her garden. Mrs. Davison knew Karen was being spiteful. She was using her position on the HOA to get away with being rude and inconsiderate. This wasn't just about the gate code, it was about Karen always thinking she was better than everyone else. Mrs. Davison knew she had to do something. She wouldn't let Karen get away with this. She started thinking about how she could get back at Karen, not in a mean way, but in a way that would teach her a lesson about being a good neighbor. An idea started to form in her mind, a mischievous plan that involved a little bit of technology and a whole lot of cleverness. Karen, meanwhile, was bustling around her house, making sure everything was perfect for her party. She had spent weeks planning it, ordering special decorations, and hiring a DJ. This wasn't just any party, it was a chance for Karen to show off how important and popular she was. She wanted everyone to admire her beautiful house, her expensive decorations, and her fabulous taste. The truth was, Karen wasn't as confident as she seemed. She craved attention and validation. Being on the HOA board gave her a sense of power, a way to control things and feel important. She enjoyed enforcing the rules and making sure everyone followed her lead. It made her feel like she was in charge, which was something she desperately needed. But even with all the planning, Karen was still worried about one thing, the gate. The community gate was a constant source of frustration for her. It was supposed to keep the neighborhood safe, but it also made it difficult for guests to enter. She had tried to convince the HOA to get a new, more modern system, but they had refused, saying it was too expensive. So, Karen had to rely on the old-fashioned gate code. She knew that explaining the code to all her guests would be a hassle. They would get confused, hold up the line, and maybe even get lost. That's when she had the idea to use Mrs. Davison's code. It was a simple solution, and she didn't think Mrs. Davison would mind. After all, what was one little gate code between neighbors? She even thought it was a bit funny. Mrs. Davison was so quiet and reserved, while Karen was the life of the party. It was like a secret joke that only she knew. As the afternoon wore on, Karen became increasingly excited. She put on her fanciest dress, did her hair and makeup, and made sure her house was spotless. She imagined her guests arriving, admiring her decorations, and showering her with compliments. She couldn't wait to be the center of attention. She double-checked the guest list, making sure everyone important was coming. She had invited all the influential people in the neighborhood, hoping to impress them and solidify her position on the HOA board. She even invited the president of the HOA, hoping to gain his favor. As the sun began to set, the first guests started to arrive. Karen greeted them with a big smile, directing them to the backyard where the party was in full swing. The music was loud, the drinks were flowing, and everyone seemed to be having a good time. Karen was in her element, mingling with her guests, telling jokes, and making sure everyone had everything they needed. She was finally getting the attention she craved. Everything was going perfectly, or so she thought. Little did she know, Mrs. Davison's plan was about to be set in motion, and Karen's perfect party was about to take a very unexpected turn. Meanwhile, down the street, cars were starting to line up at the community gate. Karen's guests, dressed in their party clothes, were eager to join the fun. But as they approached the gate, they noticed something was different. Instead of the usual keypad with numbers, there was a small sign with a phone number on it. Confused, the first car pulled up closer to read the sign. It said, "Enter by calling this number." The driver, a man named Mr. Peterson, shrugged and pulled out his cell phone. He dialed the number and waited. After a few rings, a voice answered, but it wasn't the usual automated system. Instead, it was a silly, sing-song voice that said, "Hello. You've reached the super-secret gate hotline. Please leave a message after the beep, but be warned, if you're calling for Karen's party, you're in for a surprise." Beep. Mr. Peterson was bewildered. He looked around at the other cars in line, who were also staring at him with confused expressions. He decided to leave a message, hoping someone would explain what was going on. Hi, he said awkwardly. "I'm here for Karen's party, and I don't know how to get in. Can someone please open the gate?" He hung up the phone and waited. A few seconds later, the gate slowly creaked open. Mr. Peterson drove through, shaking his head in confusion. What was that all about? As more and more guests arrived, the same scene played out again and again. They called the number, heard the silly voicemail message, and left confused messages. Some of them were annoyed, some were amused, but all of them were puzzled. The phone number system was causing chaos at the gate. Cars were backing up, horns were honking, and people were getting frustrated. Some of the guests even started walking to Karen's house to complain about the strange gate system. Back at the party, Karen was too busy mingling to notice the commotion at the gate. She was laughing and chatting with her guests, enjoying the attention and admiration. She thought everything was going perfectly. But then, one of her guests, Mrs. Johnson, approached her with a frown. "Karen," she said, "what's going on with the gate? It's so confusing. I had to call some weird number and leave a message just to get in." Karen's smile faltered. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice laced with concern. "The gate code is, well, it's Mrs. Davison's code. I told everyone to use that." Mrs. Johnson raised her eyebrows. "Well, there's no keypad with a code. There's only a sign with a phone number. And the voicemail message is very strange." Karen's face turned pale. She realized something was terribly wrong. Mrs. Davison had done something to the gate, and it was causing a major problem for her party. She excused herself and hurried towards the front of the house, determined to find out what was going on. As she approached the gate, she could hear the sounds of frustrated drivers and a faint echo of the silly voicemail message. She knew she had to do something, and fast, before her perfect party turned into a complete disaster. The only problem was, she had no idea what Mrs. Davison had done, or how to fix it. As Karen stormed toward the gate, she could hear the faint sound of the gate's phone ringing incessantly. She pushed through the line of cars, her perfectly coiffed hair getting slightly disheveled in the process. Finally, she reached the gate and stared in disbelief at the sign with the phone number. "This can't be happening," she muttered to herself. She pulled out her own phone and dialed the number, her fingers trembling with anger. The familiar sing-song voice answered, "Hello. You've reached the super-secret gate hotline. Please leave a message after the beep, but be warned, if you're calling for Karen's party, you're in for a surprise." Beep. Karen slammed her fist on the hood of a nearby car, startling the driver. "This is ridiculous," she shouted. "Who did this?" Just then, she spotted Mrs. Davison standing across the street in her garden, calmly watering her roses. A faint smile played on Mrs. Davison's lips. Karen marched over to Mrs. Davison's house, her high heels clicking angrily on the pavement. "Mrs. Davison," she yelled. "What have you done to the gate?" Mrs. Davison looked up from her roses, her eyes wide with innocence. "Oh, hello, Karen," she said sweetly. "Is there something wrong?" "Wrong?" Karen sputtered. "Everything is wrong. My guests can't get into the party because of your silly phone number. What did you do to the gate code?" Mrs. Davison shrugged. "I don't know what you're talking about, Karen. I haven't touched the gate code." Karen's face turned red with rage. "Don't play dumb with me. I know you did this. You're just trying to ruin my party because I used your gate code." Mrs. Davison chuckled softly. "Now, Karen, why would I do that? I'm sure it was just a simple misunderstanding. Maybe the gate system glitched." "Glitched?" Karen scoffed. "Don't give me that. I know you reprogrammed the gate to require a phone number. Why would you do something so mean?" Mrs. Davison sighed. "Well, Karen, perhaps if you had asked me before giving out my personal gate code to all your party guests, none of this would have happened. It's not very neighborly to use someone's private information without their permission, is it?" Karen was speechless. She knew Mrs. Davison was right, but she didn't want to admit it. She had been so focused on her party and her own importance that she hadn't even considered Mrs. Davison's feelings. But my party," Karen stammered. "You're ruining my party." Mrs. Davison smiled gently. "Maybe this will teach you a lesson about being a good neighbor, Karen. And maybe next time, you'll think twice before using someone's personal information without asking." With that, Mrs. Davison turned back to her roses, leaving Karen standing in the street, seething with anger and embarrassment. Karen knew she had been outsmarted. Mrs. Davison had turned the tables on her, and there was nothing she could do about it. Her perfect party was quickly turning into a complete disaster, all thanks to her own spiteful actions. Back at the gate, the chaos continued to escalate. Cars were now lined up down the street, blocking traffic. Some of Karen's guests, tired of waiting, simply parked their cars and walked the rest of the way to the party, further adding to the confusion. Karen, defeated and embarrassed, trudged back to her house. The music seemed louder now, and the laughter of her guests sounded mocking. She felt like everyone was laughing at her. She tried to salvage the situation by personally directing cars through the gate, but it was no use. The phone number system was still in place, and the silly voicemail message continued to play, adding to the absurdity of the situation. Meanwhile, Mrs. Davison, back in her garden, watched the scene unfold with a sense of satisfaction. She had carefully planned her revenge, and it was working perfectly. It all started earlier that day, when Mrs. Davison noticed an unusually high number of unfamiliar cars entering the community. At first, she thought there might be a problem with the gate system. But then, she saw a group of people walking towards Karen's house, dressed in party clothes. That's when she realized what Karen had done. Karen had given out her gate code to all her party guests without even asking. Mrs. Davison was furious. It wasn't just about the inconvenience, it was about Karen's blatant disregard for her privacy and her complete lack of respect. Mrs. Davison knew she had to do something. She couldn't let Karen get away with this. But she didn't want to cause a scene or start a fight. She wanted to teach Karen a lesson, but in a way that was both clever and effective. That's when she came up with the idea to reprogram the gate system. Mrs. Davison had always been good with technology. She had even worked as a computer programmer before she retired. She knew she could figure out a way to change the gate code and replace it with something else. She spent the afternoon researching the gate system, studying its programming, and figuring out how to bypass its security measures. It wasn't easy, but she was determined to succeed. Finally, she managed to hack into the system and reprogram the gate. She replaced the keypad with a sign that displayed a phone number. And instead of the usual automated greeting, she recorded a silly voicemail message that poked fun at Karen and her party. She knew it was a bit mischievous, but she felt justified in her actions. Karen had crossed a line, and she deserved to be taught a lesson. As she watched the chaos unfold at the gate, Mrs. Davison couldn't help but smile. She had successfully turned the tables on Karen, and she had done it without resorting to name-calling or yelling. She had simply used her intelligence and her skills to outsmart her annoying neighbor. And in the process, she had taught Karen a valuable lesson about being a good neighbor and respecting other people's privacy. The sweet smell of roses filled the air as she continued to tend to her garden, the sounds of Karen's failing party fading into the background. Justice, it seemed, had been served. The reprogramming of the gate system was no easy feat. It required patience, skill, and a deep understanding of computer technology. Mrs. Davison, armed with her years of experience and a burning desire for justice, approached the task with meticulous care. First, she needed to gain access to the gate's control panel. This was located in a small, locked box near the entrance. Luckily, Mrs. Davison had a knack for lock picking. It was a skill she had picked up years ago, out of sheer curiosity. With a few carefully placed pins and a gentle touch, she was able to unlock the box without damaging it. Inside, she found the gate's main circuit board. It was a complex web of wires, chips, and connectors. Mrs. Davison carefully studied the board, tracing the connections and identifying the key components. She knew that if she made a mistake, she could damage the entire system. Using her laptop and a special cable, she connected to the circuit board and began to access the gate's programming. The code was complex and convoluted, but Mrs. Davison was able to navigate through it with ease. She located the section that controlled the gate code and began to make changes. Instead of simply changing the code, she decided to replace the entire system with a new one. She wrote a program that would require visitors to call a specific phone number in order to gain access to the community. The program would then automatically open the gate after a short delay. But Mrs. Davison didn't stop there. She wanted to add a little bit of humor to the situation. She recorded a silly voicemail message that would play when people called the number. The message was designed to be both amusing and informative, warning callers that they were in for a surprise if they were attending Karen's party. The entire process took several hours, but Mrs. Davison was determined to get it right. She worked tirelessly, tweaking the code, testing the system, and making sure everything was perfect. Finally, as the sun began to set, she finished her work. She disconnected her laptop, closed the control panel, and locked the box. She stood back and admired her handiwork. The gate system was now completely transformed, thanks to her skills and her determination. As she walked back to her house, Mrs. Davison felt a sense of accomplishment. She had successfully carried out her revenge, and she had done it in a way that was both clever and satisfying. She knew that Karen would be furious when she discovered what had happened, but Mrs. Davison didn't care. She had stood up for herself, and she had taught Karen a valuable lesson about respecting other people's privacy. And that, she thought, was worth more than anything. She also knew that while this was a great prank, she would change it back soon. She didn't want to inconvenience the whole neighborhood forever, just teach Karen a lesson. The next day, as Karen's party got into full swing, the gate became a source of utter pandemonium. Her guests, expecting a simple gate code, were met with the baffling sign displaying the phone number. Confusion rippled through the arriving cars like a wave. Mr. Henderson, dressed in a brightly colored Hawaiian shirt, was one of the first to arrive. He peered at the sign, scratching his head. "Call a number. What kind of gate is this?" He reluctantly pulled out his phone and dialed. The sing-song voicemail message blasted through his car speakers, causing him to jump. He fumbled to leave a message, his face a mask of bewilderment. Hello? I'm here for Karen's party. The sign said to call this number. Can someone please open the gate?" The gate creaked open a few moments later, and Mr. Henderson drove through, muttering to himself about strange neighborhoods and even stranger gate systems. Behind him, Mrs. Gable, wearing a sparkly dress and oversized sunglasses, was equally perplexed. She, too, dialed the number and listened to the bizarre voicemail message. She found it mildly amusing, but also incredibly inconvenient. "This is Mrs. Gable," she said into the phone. "I'm here for Karen's party. Please let me in." "And what is with that crazy voicemail?" The gate opened, and Mrs. Gable sailed through, shaking her head and wondering what Karen had gotten herself into this time. As more and more guests arrived, the calls started flooding Karen's phone. She was trying to mingle and enjoy her party, but her phone kept ringing incessantly. Each call was a guest complaining about the confusing gate system and the ridiculous voicemail message. "Karen, what's going on with the gate?" one guest asked. "I had to call some crazy number and listen to a silly message just to get in." "Karen, is this some kind of joke?" another guest demanded. "The voicemail message is making fun of your party." Karen's carefully constructed facade of happiness began to crumble. She tried to explain that there must be some mistake, that she had given everyone the correct gate code, but no one believed her. "There's no keypad, Karen," one exasperated guest shouted. "There's only a sign with a phone number." Karen's phone continued to ring, each call bringing more complaints and more frustration. She was running back and forth between her guests and the gate, trying to direct traffic and explain the situation, but it was no use. The chaos was spiraling out of control. She started to get angry. Who would do something like this? Who would sabotage her party in such a mean and ridiculous way? She suspected it was Mrs. Davison, but she couldn't be sure. As the sun began to set, Karen's party was in complete disarray. The music was still playing, but the atmosphere was tense and uncomfortable. Her guests were annoyed, her decorations were askew, and her carefully planned evening was ruined. And it was all because of a silly phone number and a ridiculous voicemail message. Karen knew she had to do something to fix the situation, but she had no idea where to start. The only thing she knew for sure was that Mrs. Davison was somehow involved, and she was going to pay. The secret to Mrs. Davison's brilliantly annoying prank lay in the details of the voicemail message. It wasn't just any ordinary outgoing message, it was a carefully crafted piece of comedic genius, designed to both confuse and subtly mock Karen's obsession with rules. Mrs. Davison spent a good hour writing and rehearsing the message, making sure it was just the right blend of silly and sarcastic. She even added a few sound effects to make it extra memorable. The final version went something like this. "Greetings, valued guest. You have reached the official gate access hotline for the prestigious, neighborhood name, community. Due to recent, unauthorized code sharing incidents, we have implemented a new and improved security protocol." Sound of a kazoo. "If you are here to visit our esteemed HOA board member, Karen, please be advised that all party attendees must adhere to the following regulations. 1. Absolutely no inflatable flamingos exceeding 3 feet in height are permitted. Sound of a deflating balloon. 2. Music volume must remain below 60 decibels after 9 p.m. Failure to comply will result in immediate removal from the premises. Sound of a record scratching. 3. All guests must sign a waiver agreeing to abide by the HOA's strict rules regarding lawn maintenance, holiday decorations, and acceptable color schemes for front doors. Sound of frantic scribbling. To proceed with your entry, please leave your name, the reason for your visit, and your favorite HOA rule after the beep. Sound of a loud, obnoxious beep. Thank you for your cooperation, and have a perfectly rule-abiding day. Mrs. Davison even used a slightly exaggerated, prim voice, mimicking the way Karen often spoke at HOA meetings. She knew that the message would not only confuse Karen's guests but also subtly poke fun at Karen's personality and her love for enforcing the rules. The message was a hit. As Karen's guests called the number and listened to the ridiculous voicemail, they couldn't help but chuckle. Some of them even started recording the message and sharing it with their friends. The voicemail quickly became the talk of the neighborhood. People who weren't even attending Karen's party were calling the number just to hear the message. It was so funny and so cleverly done that it was impossible not to laugh. Even some of the HOA members found the message amusing, although they were careful not to let Karen know. They knew that Karen took her position on the board very seriously, and she wouldn't appreciate being made fun of. But the real genius of the voicemail message was that it subtly exposed Karen's flaws and her obsession with rules. It highlighted her tendency to be controlling and overbearing, and it made her look ridiculous in the process. As Karen's party continued to unravel, the voicemail message became a symbol of her downfall. It was a constant reminder of her own arrogance and her lack of consideration for others. And it was all thanks to Mrs. Davison's clever wit and her talent for creating the perfectly annoying, voicemail message. The message had power, and it was about to make Karen even more miserable. What started as a local prank soon took on a life of its own. As more and more people heard Mrs. Davison's hilarious voicemail message, they began to share it online. First, it was posted on the neighborhood's private Facebook group. Then, someone uploaded it to YouTube. And from there, it spread like wildfire. The message was perfectly suited for the internet age. It was short, funny, and relatable. People all over the world could understand the frustration of dealing with an overbearing HOA and a rule-obsessed neighbor. Soon, the voicemail message was being shared on Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram. It was even featured on a popular podcast that focused on funny voicemail messages. The story of Karen and Mrs. Davison quickly went viral. News websites and blogs picked up the story, and it wasn't long before it was being reported on national television. People were fascinated by the feud between the two neighbors. They loved the David versus Goliath dynamic, with the quiet, unassuming Mrs. Davison standing up to the powerful and overbearing Karen. The internet rallied behind Mrs. Davison, praising her cleverness and her courage. They created memes and GIFs based on the voicemail message, and they flooded Karen's social media accounts with comments and jokes. Karen, who had always craved attention, was now getting more attention than she ever wanted. But it wasn't the kind of attention she had hoped for. She was being ridiculed and mocked by people all over the world. She tried to defend herself, posting angry messages on social media and giving interviews to local news outlets. But everything she said only made things worse. She came across as defensive, arrogant, and completely out of touch. The more she tried to defend herself, the more people turned against her. She became a symbol of everything that was wrong with HOAs and with people who abused their power. The online backlash was intense. People were calling for her to be removed from the HOA board, and they were threatening to boycott her business. Karen's life was quickly spiraling out of control. Her party was a disaster, her reputation was ruined, and she was being harassed by people all over the world. And it was all thanks to Mrs. Davison's clever prank and the power of the internet. As the story continued to spread, Mrs. Davison remained calm and composed. She didn't seek out the attention, but she didn't shy away from it either. She knew that she had done the right thing, and she was proud of herself for standing up to Karen. She also knew that the internet's attention was fleeting, and that the story would eventually fade away. But for now, she was content to sit back and watch as Karen's world crumbled around her. Justice, it seemed, was finally being served. And it was all thanks to a silly voicemail message that had gone viral. The viral prank was Karen's worst nightmare come true. She had always prided herself on her impeccable image and her position in the community. Now, she was being ridiculed and mocked by people all over the world. The humiliation was almost unbearable. She couldn't go anywhere without being recognized and whispered about. People would point and laugh at her, and some would even shout insults. She tried to hide at home, but even there she wasn't safe. Her phone was constantly ringing with prank calls, and her social media accounts were flooded with hateful messages. Desperate to salvage her reputation, Karen decided to fight back. She posted a long, rambling message on Facebook. That long, rambling message on Facebook was a disaster. In it, Karen blamed Mrs. Davison for everything, accused her of hacking the gate system, which was technically true, but not a good look for Karen, and claimed that she was the victim of a cyberbullying campaign. She even tried to justify giving out Mrs. Davison's gate code, saying that it was for the good of the community, and that Mrs. Davison was being uncooperative. The message only served to fuel the fire. People were quick to point out the inconsistencies in her story and to mock her for trying to portray herself as a victim. The hashtag Karen of the Gate began to trend on Twitter, and the memes and jokes became even more brutal. The HOA board knew that they had to do something. The situation was spiraling out of control, and Karen's behavior was reflecting poorly on the entire community. They decided to call an emergency meeting to discuss the matter. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, and it was packed with angry residents. Everyone had an opinion on what had happened, and they were eager to voice their concerns. The president of the HOA, Mr. Thompson, tried to maintain order, but it was difficult. People were shouting and arguing, and the atmosphere was tense. Karen was there, looking pale and shaken. She tried to defend herself, but her voice was drowned out by the angry voices of her neighbors. "This is all a big misunderstanding," she shouted. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen." But no one was listening. They were tired of her excuses and her arrogance. They had had enough of her rule-obsessed behavior and her constant attempts to control everything. Finally, Mr. Thompson managed to restore some order. He explained that the purpose of the meeting was to discuss Karen's behavior and to decide what action should be taken. He then opened the floor for comments. One by one, residents stepped forward to share their stories about Karen's past transgressions. They talked about her petty rules, her unfair treatment of neighbors, and her constant attempts to exert her authority. Mrs. Davison was also in attendance, sitting quietly in the back of the room. She didn't say anything, but her presence was felt by everyone. She was a symbol of the community's frustration with Karen and their desire for change. As the meeting went on, it became clear that Karen's position on the HOA board was no longer tenable. The community had lost faith in her, and they were determined to remove her from power. The stage was set for a vote that would decide Karen's fate and determine the future of the neighborhood name, community. The air crackled with anticipation, and everyone knew that this was a moment of truth. The actions of one spiteful HOA member had led to a crisis, and the community was ready to take a stand. The HOA meeting became a platform for airing years of pent-up frustrations. One by one, neighbors rose to share their experiences with Karen's overzealous rule enforcement and her often arbitrary decisions. Mr. Henderson, the man in the Hawaiian shirt who had struggled with the gate, spoke first. "Remember last summer, when Karen made Mrs. Rodriguez take down her Christmas lights in July because they weren't seasonal enough? Mrs. Rodriguez was just trying to spread some cheer. It was ridiculous." Mrs. Gable, the woman with the sparkly dress, chimed in. "And what about the time she fined Mr. Johnson for having a slightly overgrown lawn, even though he was recovering from surgery? She has no compassion." A young mother, Sarah, stood up, her voice trembling with anger. "She told me I couldn't put a small basketball hoop in my driveway for my kids to play with because it violated the aesthetic harmony of the neighborhood. My kids just wanted to have some fun." An elderly gentleman, Mr. Abernathy, who lived down the street from Karen, spoke next. She sent me a notice because my petunias weren't the right shade of pink. Petunias. I've been gardening for 50 years, and she's telling me what color flowers I can plant. The stories continued, each one more absurd than the last. It became clear that Karen had been using her position on the HOA board to harass and control her neighbors, often over the pettiest of issues. Even Mr. Thompson, the usually neutral president of the HOA, couldn't help but express his frustration. I've tried to mediate these disputes, but Karen has always been unwilling to compromise. She believes that her way is the only way, and she's not afraid to use her power to enforce her will. As the neighbors spoke, Karen sat silently, her face growing redder and redder. She realized that she had underestimated the extent of their resentment. She had thought that she was simply enforcing the rules, but now she saw that she had been alienating her neighbors and creating a climate of fear and resentment. She tried to interrupt, to defend herself, but no one would let her speak. They were too eager to finally have their voices heard, to finally stand up to the woman who had been bullying them for so long. Mrs. Davison watched the scene unfold with a sense of quiet satisfaction. She hadn't orchestrated this outpouring of anger, but she was glad that it was finally happening. She knew that Karen needed to be held accountable for her actions, and she hoped that this meeting would be a turning point. The stories shared at the meeting painted a clear picture of Karen's character, a petty, controlling, and vindictive woman who had abused her power and alienated her neighbors. It was a damning indictment, and it left little doubt about the outcome of the vote. The community had spoken, and they were ready to send a message: Karen's reign of terror was over. Mr. Thompson, after hearing the impassioned pleas from the community, called for a vote. He explained the process clearly and fairly, ensuring that everyone understood the gravity of the decision. All those in favor of removing Karen, last name, from the HOA board, please raise your hand, he said, his voice solemn. A sea of hands went up. It was almost unanimous. Only a few hands remained down, presumably belonging to Karen's closest allies. The message was clear: the community had spoken. Mr. Thompson counted the votes carefully, then announced the results. The motion to remove Karen, last name, from the HOA board passes overwhelmingly. A collective sigh of relief swept through the room. People clapped and cheered, expressing their joy and satisfaction. Karen sat in stunned silence, her face pale and drawn. She had lost. Her reign of terror was over. As Karen gathered her belongings and prepared to leave the meeting, she couldn't help but feel a sense of bitterness and resentment. She had dedicated so much time and energy to the HOA, and this was how she was repaid. But as she looked around the room, she saw not anger or hatred, but a sense of hope and optimism. The community was finally free from her control, and they were eager to move forward. As Karen walked out of the clubhouse, she was met with a mixture of silence and polite nods. No one cheered or jeered. They simply watched her go, knowing that a new chapter was about to begin. After Karen's departure, the atmosphere in the room shifted. People began to talk and laugh, sharing their relief and excitement. They started to discuss ideas for the future of the community, brainstorming ways to make it a more welcoming and inclusive place. Many people approached Mrs. Davison, thanking her for standing up to Karen and for inspiring them to speak out. They saw her as a hero, a symbol of courage and resilience. "You showed us that we don't have to be afraid," one neighbor said. "You gave us the strength to fight back." Mrs. Davison smiled humbly. "I just did what I thought was right," she said. "I couldn't stand by and watch Karen continue to bully and harass our neighbors." People began to suggest that Mrs. Davison should run for the HOA board herself. They believed that she would be a fair and compassionate leader, someone who would listen to the community's concerns and act in their best interests. Mrs. Davison was hesitant at first, but after giving it some thought, she agreed. She knew that the community needed strong leadership, and she was willing to step up and serve. The following week, Mrs. Davison officially announced her candidacy for the HOA board. Her announcement was met with widespread support, and it was clear that she was the front-runner in the race. The community had spoken. They were ready for a change, and they saw Mrs. Davison as the person who could bring that change about. The reign of Karen was over, and a new era was dawning. The sweet smell of roses, once a symbol of Mrs. Davison's quiet life, now represented the blossoming hope for a better community. One of Mrs. Davison's first acts after being elected to the HOA board was to address the gate situation. She knew that the phone number system had been a temporary solution, a means to an end. It was time to restore normalcy to the community. With the help of a trusted technician, Mrs. Davison reprogrammed the gate system, replacing the phone number with a new, easy-to-remember code. She made sure to communicate the new code to all residents, along with clear instructions on how to use it. The change was met with widespread approval. People were relieved to have a simple and reliable way to access the community. The chaos and confusion at the gate disappeared, replaced by a sense of calm and order. With the gate issue resolved, the neighborhood slowly began to return to its peaceful state. The online attention faded, and the memes and jokes about Karen gradually disappeared from the internet. As for Karen, she was rarely seen in the neighborhood after her removal from the HOA board. She kept to herself, avoiding contact with her former neighbors. The humiliation and embarrassment had taken a toll on her, and she seemed to have lost her confidence and her zest for life. A few weeks later, a moving truck pulled up to Karen's house. The neighbors watched as her belongings were loaded onto the truck, one by one. It was clear that she was leaving for good. No one said goodbye, or offered her any words of comfort. They simply watched her go, knowing that her departure marked the end of an era. The neighborhood breathed a collective sigh of relief. Karen was gone, and they were finally free to move on. The atmosphere in the community was lighter and more relaxed. People started to smile and wave at each other again, and the sense of unity and goodwill began to return. With Karen gone, the HOA board was able to focus on more important issues, such as improving the landscaping, organizing community events, and addressing the concerns of the residents. Mrs. Davison proved to be a fair and compassionate leader, always listening to the community's needs and acting in their best interests. The neighborhood name, community had learned a valuable lesson about the importance of kindness, respect, and standing up to bullies. They had also learned that even the quietest and most unassuming person can make a big difference. The sweet smell of roses continued to fill the air, a constant reminder of Mrs. Davison's courage and her unwavering commitment to creating a better community for everyone. And the gate, once a source of conflict and chaos, now stood as a symbol of peace and harmony, a testament to the power of unity and the triumph of good over evil. The neighborhood was finally at peace. Under Mrs. Davison's leadership, the HOA board underwent a complete transformation. Gone were the days of petty rules and arbitrary fines. In their place came a spirit of collaboration, compromise, and community. Mrs. Davison made it a priority to listen to the concerns of all residents, regardless of their background or their opinions. She held regular town hall meetings, where people could voice their concerns and offer suggestions for improving the neighborhood. She also worked to create a more inclusive and welcoming environment. She organized community events, such as block parties and potlucks, to encourage neighbors to get to know each other. She also supported initiatives to help those in need, such as food drives and clothing donations. Mrs. Davison's fairness and kindness quickly won her the respect and admiration of the community. People trusted her to make decisions that were in their best interests, and they appreciated her willingness to listen and to compromise. She became a beloved member of the HOA board, known for her integrity, her compassion, and her unwavering commitment to creating a better community. The neighborhood name, community had learned a valuable lesson about the importance of being a good neighbor. They had learned that kindness and respect are essential for building a strong and thriving community. They had also learned that even the quietest and most unassuming person can make a big difference. Mrs. Davison, who had once been seen as a shy and reclusive neighbor, had emerged as a leader and a hero, proving that anyone can make a positive impact on their community. And as the sweet smell of roses continued to fill the air, it served as a reminder of the power of unity, the importance of standing up to bullies, and the transformative effect of kindness and compassion. The neighborhood name, community was finally at peace, and it was all thanks to the courage and the leadership of Mrs. Davison. From that day forward, the neighbors made a conscious effort to be more considerate of each other. They learned to appreciate their differences and to celebrate their shared values. They worked together to create a community that was welcoming, inclusive, and supportive. And as the years passed, the story of Karen and Mrs. Davison became a legend, a cautionary tale about the dangers of arrogance and the power of kindness. It was a story that was passed down from generation to generation, reminding everyone of the importance of being a good neighbor and of standing up for what is right. The sweet smell of roses, forever associated with Mrs. Davison and her unwavering commitment to creating a better community, served as a constant reminder of the lessons they had learned and the values they had embraced. The neighborhood name, community, was not just a place to live, it was a place to belong, a place to grow, and a place to thrive. And it was all thanks to a quiet woman, a spiteful HOA member, and a silly voicemail message that went viral. The end.